Congress has become barely functioning assisted living facility with subpoena power.
Republicans in Congress just funded Planned Parenthood. Matt, how are people behind closed doors in your party taking this?
Truthfully, this gives us a lot of worry. This scares Republicans right now.
Why are Democrats' chances moving up in the Senate? I believe the race map has expanded this week. It's Political Rehab, where PTI meets The Daily Show. This week, America back at war, a senator who the world believes is secretly dead, a truly stunning sign of Republicans' collapse, affordability theater gets panned, the DOJ threatens the election, and in our battlefield segment, a sneaky strong week for Democrats. So let's get straight to this week's rundown. Well, we're back, or maybe we never really left 3 weeks after Trump signed a peace deal at Versailles. That's never gone wrong before. He stood at the NATO summit in Ankara and declared it dead. He said, quote, "I think it's over. I don't want to deal with them anymore." The Iranians, they're scum, he told reporters, right as CENTCOM launched a second straight day of strikes and oil prices spiked. This isn't a return to war so much as an admission that the war never really stopped. Matt, 3 weeks ago, you called the Iran deal the biggest political and military failure of any president in American history. This week, Trump called it a huge success. So why were you so wrong?
I was not wrong. I want to double down on what I just said, because it has been the biggest military and political disaster we have ever seen in American history. Look, I've said this before. I think going to war with Iran was probably the right thing to do. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. But Trump seemed to forget something very important, that he is accountable to the American people. But he gave zero explanations, no proof, no evidence that they were even close to a nuclear weapon. And it's no wonder Americans oppose this war by huge margins. And now, by all indications, it is an endless war. But what makes this such a disaster is that Trump is actually fighting the wrong war. He is busy with missile strikes and blowing up things, which is great for TV. But Iran's opportunity to inflict maximum damage is not what they can blow up, but it is the midterm elections. They know the American people are not with him on this. They know they can spike oil prices. And Iran is aware of the political calendar, 4 months until the midterms. And all they have to do is provoke Trump, and he responds. And it drives up oil prices, and it hurts Trump, and it hurts the GOP. And Trump just can't ignore the attacks, otherwise he looks weak. So the bottom line is Trump put himself in a no-win situation, all on his doing, and that's why it's a disaster.
I would say when it comes to launching the war originally, I would interject, au contraire, mon frere. I don't think that this was ever a very good idea. That said, I think what the real takeaway here is that Trump just gets bored. He has never been interested in governing. He's not really interested in being president or being the commander in chief or really doing anything. He's interested in getting noticed, getting flattery, getting fake peace prizes. And so when his attention wanders, when he actually has to do the hard work that goes with being president, he flops, he fails. And that's what we're seeing with Iran. It's what we're going to talk about in just a few minutes when it comes to the affordability theater that he thinks is going to solve our economic problems and really starkly isn't. The take home here is that he just ran out of attention and patience. He fell asleep again, by the way, at the NATO summit. That really is the metaphor for exactly what's happened with Iran.
And the other consequence here is that the Pentagon is literally running out of money. And so they can't even afford all of this. And what's highlighting all this is Mitch McConnell, who's been hospitalized since June 14th. His office has given almost no details about why. He's not appeared publicly or released a photo or video since. Now, I know you love to read Laura Loomer, but in case our audience didn't or they don't know who she is, this is the wackadoodle far-right conspiracy activist and Trump loyalist who said she has from a high-level source that McConnell is actually brain dead, on life support, with organ failure, and believes that he is just being propped up by the establishment because there's an August 3rd deadline, that if McConnell is declared dead before then, there's a special, and if he stays after that, The seat will stay open until the new Congress. And this is all just to kill the Save America Act. Scott Jennings said he spoke with McConnell for 20 minutes, but there's still no video. The governor of Kentucky is demanding proof of life. Matt, is this just another weekend at Bernie's moment?
I don't want to laugh about a situation that involves a human being possibly on his deathbed, but there is this weird, as you said, weekend at Mitch's element to this. Where is Russell Crowe when you need him the most? Look, I don't think this is a particularly partisan issue, notwithstanding Ms. Loomer's rantings. We've seen similar stories. Dianne Feinstein, Kay Granger, aging members of Congress whose staffs and offices kind of try to keep them hanging on out of deference to them or not wanting to complicate things politically. But even though both parties have engaged in a little bit of this, it's of course completely wrong to have someone who's not able to do the job anymore in office. And even if it would involve putting in another MAGA Republican to replace McConnell, and that's not good for my party, that is good for America. The people of Kentucky should be represented in the U.S. Senate.
I think this is the single biggest proof point of why we need term limits and age limits. Congress has become barely functioning assisted living facility with subpoena power. At some point, public services become public squatting.
Speaking of things going off the rails for Republicans in Congress, let's talk about what I consider. I emailed you this. I consider this.
Yes. I started laughing that, of course, we did this.
I can't imagine a bigger step on a rake moment for Republicans in Congress. And this follows what the previous record holder was, which was last week's, hey, we passed a beneficial housing bill on the biggest issue, affordability, that our voters are screaming at us about. Let's take the win. And Trump said no. So I thought that was like a low watermark. No, hold my beer, said Mike Johnson, because in the past week, Congress has failed to extend its defunding of Planned Parenthood through Medicaid. And by failing to do so, it's turned the funding spigot back on for Planned Parenthood. You heard that right, folks. If you are a conservative, if you are pro-life in some way, Republicans in Congress just funded Planned Parenthood. Matt, how are people behind closed doors in your party taking this?
Most of them, they were surprised because none of them are actually.
Gee, you're underselling it there, bud.
I know. Look, I think,
Surprised.
Mike Johnson's going to go down as the worst speaker in the history of Congress. And I'm including Nancy Pelosi in this list, who I disagreed with everything, but she at least knew how to run the House. She could count votes, manage her conference, protect her members, and get things done. Mike Johnson looks like he's constantly being surprised by the job. This is unconscionable. And it's going to be very hard for us to go back and campaign to say, yes, trust us. We can govern. We can do things. We had an opportunity as Republicans to usher in a new era of conservatism, and we blew it because of things like this. We just can't get out of our own way.
You know what's a shocking contrast that's just occurred to me? Zohran Mamdani. I think both you and I were skeptical that a Democratic socialist who had made such lofty promises of what he was going to do, freeze the rent, free buses, low-cost city-owned grocery stores, the list goes on, that he was going to be able to govern. The history of socialist governance in big cities or any big government structure in America is spotty at best. I'm a New York City native. All reports from my people on the ground there are that he's doing a pretty good job. He's being pretty practical. He's making some compromises. He's making the trains run on time. He's making the not so free buses run on time. And meanwhile, you have Mike Johnson just proving once again that Republicans cannot govern and can't deliver on the things that the American people want the most.
And what makes it worse is that we are too busy worrying about what the headline looks like than actual governing. And case in point was the White House this week, who spent the week trying to show voters that is doing something about prices. Trump promoted the new Freedom Fuel gas stations in Philadelphia, selling gas at $3.47. The 47 cents is a nod to him being the 47th president. And at the same time, USDA officials pressured Walmart and other grocers to cut beef prices before the 4th of July, which is why this all feels less like an economic plan and more like price theater. Matt, am I wrong?
This connects to the point I was making earlier about Trump not caring at all about the messy details of governing, not really caring about policy, not really caring about Americans at all. Mike Johnson obviously has no idea what goes into doing this job. I'm a former congressional staffer for a decade. I am positive that there are people who know this stuff. Trump seems determined to believe that he can just hand wave things. We can say that we're solving problems. COVID's going to zero. We have no problem with tariffs. This is going to be amazing. And reality doesn't matter. And so we got signal after signal in the past week that things are going really badly in terms of Americans' economic pain. Clean energy groups are pointing out that Trump's attacks on wind and solar are pushing electric rates substantially higher nationally. Republican SNAP cuts have pushed hundreds of thousands of Arizonans, that's a swing state, off of food stamps. Medicaid cuts are becoming a live, rising political issue in places like Iowa, a must-hold Senate state for Republicans. And of course, we have the gas price spikes and the fact that 2.6 million Americans have failed to re-enroll in the Affordable Care Act. I know that this is a point of disagreement between Democrats and Republicans. Republicans don't like the Affordable Care Act. Democrats do. But the point is, this is the way that we're getting Americans somewhat more affordable health care. And Republicans refused. They would rather have shut down the government. They refused to pass the subsidies that were making healthcare more affordable for Americans. 3/4 of the people who received those subsidies are in states that voted for Donald Trump. So when you see the numbers that we're going to get into in our battlefield segment in just a couple of minutes, when you see these kinds of deeply negative numbers for Trump and the Republican Party, this is the beating pulse that's underneath them. All of these indicators of just how dysfunctional governing Republicans have been and how much that's showing up in Americans' economic pain and how pissed off they are about it.
Yeah, look, what he's doing with prices, he's trying to Obi-Wan Kenobi this. These are not the droids you're looking for. But my biggest problem is that this is government-directed economic theater. The president's not creating durable competition, expanding supply, or removing structural barriers. His administration is leaning on selected companies to deliver politically useful prices on politically useful products at politically useful moments. That is not free market. That is just theater, and it's not going to help us when it comes to building our party long term or winning in November.
Saying to voters, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? That always works. Speaking of spreading lies to voters, the DOJ's Civil Rights Division sent letters this week to election officials in all 50 states and DC, threatening criminal prosecution if any non-citizens end up on voter rolls or end up casting ballots, even though, as we've gone over time and time again, non-citizen voting is extraordinarily rare. It is a wisp. It barely ever happens. You're more likely to die in a Sharknado than ever witness a non-citizen voting. This is the latest example of theater of Trump's DOJ trying to build a case that elections are rigged and are fundamentally unfair, and there's big conspiracies going on, and it's all BS. And look, Matt, I got to ask you from a Republican campaign consultant's point of view, why is this helpful?
Yeah, look, he's not trying to solve voter fraud. He's trying to manufacture an appearance of voter fraud crackdown. He is weaponizing the Department of Justice to generate headlines, feed the base, and create a cloud of suspicion before the election happens. We are going to lose the House. And Trump cannot say that it was Republicans or his policies or his blatant abuse of the Constitution that led to this. It had to be something else. This is all just setting a stage. Because if you talk to the base, which I do a lot, they believe every little thing that Trump says. When we talk about Laura Loomer and the conspiracy theories against Mitch McConnell, they eat that shit up. And so what we're battling is what is being fed to them to get them angry. And that's what Trump does.
Well, speaking of the battlefield, It's about time for us to look at it. And every theme that we've talked about so far, the mismatch between Trump's theater and the reality that voters are actually facing, that's what's playing out this week on the battlefield. And we're seeing some subtle signs under the surface that this was a very good week for Democrats.
The polls are shifting. The map is changing. The fight for Congress is on. This is the battlefield.
Matt, there's so much to get into, and I suspect that of the things you're looking at, we're going to end up talking about the state of Maine and Graham Plattner up to bat first. Am I wrong?
No, 100% correct. That is by far the biggest political story that has happened this week. He had no other option to get out. He was dead man walking. I've seen some people argue the Democrats are suppressing votes. It is just smart politics. It's a move a party makes when they actually want to win elections. And honestly, I think this is a good thing for Democrats because Plattner was the easier opponent for Collins. And now Senate Democrats are going to jump back in Maine and launch a lot more money to help the new Senate nominee. Look, the candidate swap that is going to happen in Maine could get you a better candidate. Right now, you're having some uncomfortable conversations, but it's getting it over with now. What I'm looking at is, are they going to put their thumb on the scale? Who are they going to pick? Is it a progressive? Is it a mainstream Democrat?
If people want to hash out what that might look like, I wrote about it on my Substack, worthknowing.substack.com. I worked as a staffer for members of Congress from Maine for 6 years. I have some ties there, and I walk through what this is all going to look like. Matt, take us inside the truth serum version of campaign headquarters for Republicans, for Susan Collins. How do Republicans right now really feel about this replacement?
Oh, truthfully, this gives us a lot of worry. This scares Republicans right now. Plattner was the easier candidate. He was easier to beat. We knew there was another shoe to drop. He's our dream candidate to run against because you can paint him in a lot of different ways. Now, if Democrats go through this convention and pick a more, I don't want to say centrist, but not some crazy wackadoodle socialist candidate, this race gets a lot harder for Susan Collins. Now, look, the Collins super PAC is sitting on $8 million, and they're just going to blow him or her up, whoever comes out of this. The question is how much we can define them, how much we can tie them to Plattner, how much we can tie them to socialists, and try to make it stick before they get out of the starting gate. But the reality of the situation is this makes Maine a hell of a lot more competitive for Democrats, and it puts control of the Senate much more at risk for Republicans.
What's your second story?
And it's probably a little bit overlooked. The Department of Justice is sending election monitors to Michigan's August primary. As operatives, we use primaries as testing grounds, as dry runs. And so what I suspect here is that lawyers are going to test some legal strategies. And by sending them in and doing it under the guise that there is election fraud happening, we're going to see this as just a small microcosm of likely what Trump's going to try in November.
So this is less about actually uncovering anything. This is more like in the movie Signs. This is the military technique. It's called probing. It's a dry run for what you're going to pull off at much greater scale in November.
Yeah, exactly. Campaigns do this. You're just trying to flex that muscle. You're trying to see where your weaknesses are. You're trying to see where the other side weaknesses are so that you are ready in November. This is our practice game, if you will. What's unique about this is it's Department of Justice flexing its muscle here, not a Republican campaign operation, but the Department of Justice, the levers of the federal government going in. It is intimidation. It is a little bit of election interference. If you can keep some voters home, it makes them a little bit more competitive for Republicans.
All right, give us your third most watched
Third story, and we sort of touched on this a little bit. There's a report out there that ACA premiums are likely for another double-digit rise next year. Insurers are projecting a rate hike of about 14%, driving up healthcare costs, inflation, and the loss of enhanced tax subsidies. This is after the 20% increase this year. Now, why this matters is affordability is obviously going to be the biggest issue, and these numbers are going to gain a lot more attention coming in October, right before people start casting their votes. And for those voters that maybe voted Republican before, if they are watching their prices go up, it becomes a real issue. The largest AC enrollment states, Florida, Texas, Georgia, and North Carolina. We've talked about each of these as Senate targets. that Democrat, or not Florida, but Texas, Georgia, and North Carolina, we've talked about as races Democrats can and will win. And so this becomes a real game changer. If there's a big portion of people who are going to watch their prices go up right before the election, it probably helps Democrats along the way.
Right. And that fits right in with what we discussed earlier. On top of the 2.6 million Americans, largely concentrated in swing states and Trump voting states, some of them in swing congressional districts, on top of all of those people not re-enrolling because their costs have gone up, now you've got this time bomb ticking in the background of further price spikes, and it feeds into this overall narrative of economic pain, problems with affording the basics of life, healthcare, food, rent, transportation, and that is reflecting itself in all of the top line numbers that we see in the election.
It's what Marjorie Taylor Greene has been warning against, and it's affordability is going to create a real problem, and they have an opportunity. But my question to you is, you're running this midterm HQ on Substack. How does all this stack up on the dashboard?
All right, well, let's take a look at it. So this week on the dashboard, you see structural indicators that are largely unmoved. A little bit of drift in Democrats' direction in the generic ballot, no movement in consumer sentiment, slight uptick for Trump in his net approval rating. Although if you read my Substack article about this, you'll see that's largely noise. It's largely a statistical phantom. The one to focus on here is his net approval continuing to slide down among independents. And that's significant because you've seen a substantial slide since January. He's down 15 points. Since the start of his term, Trump is down 30 points in net approval among independents. And I get much more into this in my Substack article, but that speaks not only to his failure to persuade swing voters of his position, but also to mobilize base Republicans. Many of these independents are Republican leaning, about half of them are, and they would normally be part of the group that you and your side would be trying to get to show up. So if you're seeing this kind of steady slide downward in this group, it doesn't augur well for your prospects of getting the turnout you need in the midterms. And that's, of course, what Republicans are banking on. When we look at the chamber status, the ratings updates, it's all flat. There's a little bit of an uptick in Polymarket in terms of win prospects for Democrats in the Senate. That's significant because that's really the main story for me this week. Even though race ratings haven't moved, why are Democrats' chances moving up in the Senate? It's not all the prospect of replacing Graham Plattner on the slate in Maine. It's actually because I believe the race map has expanded this week. And that brings me to my bottom line here, which is that you have seen more races come on the board for Democrats that are real prospects for winning. It's not that those individual races have gotten so much stronger for them. Most of them are tied. Most of the ones that they're looking at in order to flip the chamber are basically statistically tied or are a slight lean one or the other. It's that you have so many more prospects now where there's a legit chance for a flip, and that just increases Democrats' chances dramatically.
You and I talked about this off air, but the clock is on your side. And it feels like every week that Democrats are performing better than Republicans, and that map feels more and more favorable to them, that it's a problem for us as Republicans. Are you seeing it the same way? You've looked at everything, so everybody else doesn't have to. What's your take?
There are two things moving at the same time. There's that slide among independents that I spoke to a moment ago. And so that's just a structural indicator that for Trump and the Republicans, their ability to change the narrative, those opportunities are going in the wrong direction and are becoming fewer and further between. At the same time, you're seeing positive expansion in opportunities for Democrats. And look, I can show you, this is what showed up in just the last week, is in the Real Clear Politics polling average in Iowa and Texas. You're seeing statistical ties. The top one is Iowa. The bottom one is Texas. These are very credible polls. Fox News, New York Times, Siena, University of Texas. Maybe they lean slightly toward Republicans. They probably do because that's what's in these states' DNA. But Now you're talking about not two races that Democrats thought they could win and two additional races that were a stretch, Ohio and Alaska, to try to thread the needle to get to the 4 wins that Democrats needed to flip the Senate. Now you're talking about 6 races, 6 legitimate Senate races that are on the board, and they're somewhere around that tied territory. That is just a very different picture for the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I agree. And it's creating headaches for us as Republicans because now we're trying to defend more races and dollars are not unlimited. So we're trying to figure out where to spend and where we can hold.
The bottom line is bigger map, more opportunities, better for Democrats, combined with these subtle downward slides that we're seeing in other indicators. Elliot Morris estimated, based on his polling and modeling, that if Democrats can replace Plattner with a strong nominee, that would increase their chances of winning the Senate by 11%. If they can even achieve an average replacement, it would still meaningfully increase their win chances. The other sneaky one, just to point out from the past week, is Mallory McMorrow dropping out of the Senate primary in Michigan. So now it's Abdul Al-Sayed, the more progressive candidate, straight up one-on-one versus Haley Stevens being the more moderate. They're in a statistical tie, and some prediction market estimates that Democrats' chances of winning the general election in Michigan have begun to creep up a little bit. So that's another one to watch for. Well, that's a ton of information. It sounds like we're basically on the same page about the verdict for this week. So there's only one more thing to do, which is give everyone a little dose of hope.
For a while, it felt like space exploration was something we used to do. The moon was old footage, the shuttle was parked in a museum, and if you wanted to feel that sense of wonder, the only place left to find it was in the movies. But this week, we got a reminder of what American ingenuity looks like when it is pointed towards the heavens. NASA has a space telescope called SWIFT. It launched back in 2004 to study some of the most violent events in the universe: gamma ray bursts, supernovas, the kind of cosmic explosions that make you feel very small and very lucky at the same time. But SWIFT has been slowly falling back towards Earth. Solar storms help drag it lower, and without help, it could burn up in the atmosphere. So NASA turned to an Arizona startup. They built a spacecraft called Link, launched it in orbit, and now it is chasing SWIFT down. The plan is for Link to rendezvous with the telescope that was never designed to be grabbed, use robotic arms to latch on, and push it back into a safer orbit. An orbital tow truck for a falling telescope. That's the kind of thing that makes you stop doom scrolling for 5 seconds and remember human beings are capable of unbelievable things. And then we got another story that's almost sounds too casual to be real. A ride share to the moon. A Japanese company bought space on a future SpaceX Starship mission with the goal of letting multiple customers share cargo space to the lunar surface. Think less giant national moonshot and more everybody pile in. We're going to the moon. So yes, apparently we now have tow trucks in orbit and ride shares to the moon. At this rate, how long before Uber adds the lunar option? And that's what I love about this. Space does not feel like a chapter America closed. It feels like a frontier we're reopening, not just with astronauts and flags, but with engineers, entrepreneurs, startups, rocket companies, and the kind of people who look at a telescope falling out of orbit and say, yeah, we can fix that. That is America at its best, a country that still looks up, still builds, still wonders, and still finds a way to turn the impossible into the next thing we do.
When you brought up Swift, I thought you were talking about a wedding, and that was very exciting. But you know what's almost equally as exciting? And this one is for everyone, but it's especially for the guys like me out there. It was some medical news this week. Cornell Medicine and Cornell's Duffield College of Engineering, that's a mouthful, published a study showing engineered silica nanoparticles, nicknamed CDOTs, can directly destroy aggressive prostate tumors in mice while simultaneously waking up the immune system to fight the cancer too. The particles were originally built for medical imaging, not treatment, but researchers noticed along the way that they had some therapeutic effects of their own. And the particles modestly extended survival on their own, but when combined with an existing immunotherapy, 4 out of 10 mice went into complete or near complete remission and survived indefinitely. The lead researcher, Dr. Bradbury, said, quote, "We think there's nothing else out there that has such a strong and durable tumor growth suppressing effect. Prostate cancer immunotherapy is historically underperformed compared to other cancers because prostate tumors tend to be immunologically cold. That is, they're invisible to the immune system. But this approach converts cold tumors into hot tumors, which could unlock immunotherapy's potential for a cancer that's otherwise been resistant to treatment. And by the way, here's a fascinating scientific detail. The active ingredient in these nanoparticles, the amorphous silica, is the same stuff found in fossilized remains of ancient single-celled organisms. Hey, maybe future scientists will find cures for all of us in the fossils of reflecting pool algae. Now, look, I've made a couple of jokes so far about the fact that this is only in mice, and we know that mouse model work doesn't always pan out. Human trials haven't even started. This is exciting. It's not cure found. But what's so awesome about this is the way it combines nanoparticles and health and cancer investigations and looks at ancient fossils. That is the way basic science works, looking at deep questions with no payoff in mind until you connect some dots or see dots and find applications, and suddenly we all get the payoff. And look, you're still going to need your next prostate exam. Damn it, and it probably won't be done by nanoparticles or nanofingers, but at least you can know that whatever they find, the tools of federal funded science are quietly working to make the outcome better for you. And on that note, for Matt, I'm Matt. We'll see you next time.